Welcome back to another episode of Common Language Podcast, where we break down hard to understand policy concepts into easy to understand ideas for curious minds to help you stay informed, engaged, and empowered.
And this week, we are very excited to have a special guest, astrologer Megan Garber, here with us today. Hi, Megan.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome to Common Language. We're so excited to have you and hear all of your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about what drew you to astrology and your practice?
Yes, okay. Gosh, I have so much to say about this specifically, but the biggest thing is that I learned astrology through my own almost suffering itself. So trying to understand why does life work the way that it does. I actually have a background in psychology, so similar energy there where I'm like, okay, why do we operate in the timing and patterns that we do? And so it was my own Saturn return. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Saturn return, but basically my own struggle that led me to really learning astrology at the deeper level. So essentially, I am self-taught. I have not studied necessarily under any one specific astrologer, but I leaned into the timing piece of it all because the chart itself is very important. However, it's only important when we know why it's happening or how it's happening. So I specialize in timing, which is more so the ancient Hellenistic lens of things. And that kind of led me to my own timing and then reading for other people. And then, obviously, as you guys know, leaning into politics, which is such a blessing and a curse because it's really literal and exact and scientific, even. However, having that type of knowledge is also daunting. So that's how I got into it.
Totally. So, something that we love to do on the podcast is create a vocab section for our listeners so that before we dive into everything, we give like a high level of like things that they can expect. So, we thought it would be fun for you to break down a couple astrology terms before we start asking you all of our questions.
That is a very good idea.
For anyone new to astrology, these are, I think, the three key pieces to get the ball rolling. So please explain, what is a birth chart?
Okay, so birth chart technically is a snapshot of the planets in real time when you are born. So a lot of people are familiar with the circle and a bunch of lines in it. And most people are like, what is that? How do you read that? That is actually, technically, you can think about it as the globe. So the circular picture of the sky and where the planets are located, which are split up between 12 different houses. So that is what the birth chart is. But the snapshot itself depicts your energy and your life experiences over your entire lifetime.
Love it. Okay. And what are planetary transits?
Transits are planets in real time. So imagine you have that snapshot, which is your birth chart, and that never changes. So the planets will always stay where they were at, so to speak, when you were born. Transits are planets in real time transiting that circular chart. And so I think this is going to be partially in your next question, but depending on where they're at in real time, they start to make different aspects to your natal chart, which is that chart that never changes. So depending on degrees and calculations, that starts to tell a story of how it's actually going to impact you or play out in real time. But in essence, planets in real time moving.
Yes, perfect. And you're absolutely right. My next question was about aspects.
Perfect. Yeah, aspects are interesting because this is essentially the relationship of what's going on. So, for example, when any given planet is transiting, the way it's going to hit your chart or impact your chart will determine how it feels or how it expresses. And so I would break up aspects into two different types, more, let's say, beneficial aspects, so positive, and more challenging aspects. And so the two positive aspects would be a sextile, which is harmonious, but it's more in the background. It's just natural flow versus a trine, which is a very supportive. It's like a bridge to growth or abundance or expansion. And then you have a square, which is more of a challenge and uncomfortability. And that's more of the negative or challenging aspect. And then you have an opposition, which is a relational aspect saying, hey, you're there and I'm way over here. And there's a need for balance or an actual external event. So those are the four primary aspects. that you would want to know.
Transits and aspects are my favorite part of astrology. And I know that you specialize also in predicting things and reading that way. So fascinating to me.
Yeah. Oh, Virgo rising to Virgo rising. I'm like, it's all about the detail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we actually should have said, let's go through rising signs. So Megan, Virgo rising.
Yes.
I'm also a Virgo rising. And then Mak.
Yes, I am a Leo rising, and I love it's so, again, so literal and so true to life, because I was chatting with Megan a little bit earlier and I was like, Casey knows my whole birth chart. She knows the whole details. When we get into the conversations, I just rely on her because she knows my full birth chart. She knows all the details. So,
Yes. Yes. I'm always saying, okay, Mak, brace for this.
yeah.
This week, this is what we're looking at.
Yes, yeah, I find that Virgo energy is so good, especially with astrology, because when you're looking at any sign, there's always the duality on the other side. So Virgo is the sister sign, let's say, to Pisces. And this is the axis of Pisces being very spiritual and woo-woo and abstract. And then Virgo comes in and is like, hold on, we need to ground it with something. And so in that axis, I just find that exactly astrology really works. It's okay. We have a blend of both.
100%.
I love that. Getting into kind of the meat and applying this to politics and digging a little bit deeper into your expertise and how you integrate the astrology with the politics of it all. I'm super excited to talk more about just everything, but specifically a big anniversary this country has coming up, America 250. And I was telling Case earlier, when I was on the Hill a few years ago, I worked for a member of Congress who's part of one of the committees that's responsible for planning everything that goes into the America 250 celebration. So this has been on my mind, a little bug in my head for a while. So I'm so excited to hear your perspective and take on it. But for those who don't know, July 4th, we are approaching the 250th anniversary of the United States having its independence and us being our own autonomous country. And so with the US's chart and the cycles that we have gone through in those 250 years, could you maybe break down some of what those cycles look like and maybe what it shows will be for us in the future and down the line?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. This is to me the meat of everything right now, as we are very much so feeling it, seeing it, etc. I want to start out by emphasizing how much the chart matters, right? Yes, it matters. It tells a story. But again, it matters when there's an activation or when there's a cycle or a pattern that is repeating. And it's perfect that you actually start with the 250-year anniversary, because I don't know about you guys, but for me, I was always taught, even in my history classes in high school and college, that about at 250 years, we see nations have a fall, so to speak. And so I don't know if you specifically ever learned about that, but I remember thinking like, oh, that's the Virgo rising in me, thinking, how interesting. Why is there a pattern there? And so number one, yes, we're reaching that point right now this year with the anniversary of the United States. However, what that actually is in astrological terms is the Pluto return. And so Pluto is a planet that talks about death and rebirth and corruption and the deepest, darkest hidden truths, so to speak. And so because of this power struggle energy with Pluto, oftentimes at 250 years, you see a nation literally have either a death and a rebirth, so it falls and transmutes into something else, or the death overall, right? Very symbolically speaking, but of the nation. And so on average, that transit is about 248 to 250 years, given retrograde moments. And so it's interesting because I think that is one of many cycles that is going on currently right now. And so as we approach this anniversary, it's marking a very important time moving forward too, where we will look back at this time frame specifically, in my opinion, as a turning point for America. And I think one other thing I want to mention briefly is that on the 4th of July this year, we actually have arguably one of the biggest transits of the year, where Mars conjoins Uranus, which is a whole other timeline to speak about. Basically, this is another turning point in terms of the energy that we find ourselves in today, with the rising climate of war tension and civil unrest and everything we're seeing.
A lot of what we discuss on the podcast is highlighting key issues, key information that can help empower people, right? Because knowledge is power and we want to be able to spread that. But the other thing that we're always talking about is currently the power struggles that we have going on. So when you talk about the fall of a nation, it makes a ton of sense for us because we're over here saying, hey, let's talk about the wealth gap. What's going on? Let's talk about the imbalances that we have. And for the average person, it's getting more and more challenging. So when you think of the fact that there are far more people in the middle class bucket than there are in the top tier. When you think about revolutions and change, it's like the balance has to come back into play. So are there any transits that really play into this economic pressure that you see in addition to like just the big revolution energy that we're going through?
Oh my gosh, yes. So again, we have Pluto reaching the Pluto return fully at this 250-year mark. However, the other side note about Pluto currently in transit, so in real time, is that Pluto is now in Aquarius. And Aquarius is the sign of the future. It's about innovation. It's about updates. Technically, it even rules things like AI. And it's the people as a whole. This is like the communal area of the chart or the zodiac. So it's you and me and everybody else who isn't, let's say, in the Leo area of the chart. So again, these are sister signs. They're very polarizing. Aquarius being we the people, Leo being, okay, the kings, leaders, dictators, all of that. So when you're dealing with Pluto and Aquarius, essentially it is bringing power to the people, quite literally. So in history, we see Pluto and Aquarius correlate to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and even the Haitian Revolution. And so this is one of those other transits that contributes to this major time frame where we see things really changing and unfolding, and specifically with the tone of revolution, rebellion, and just like power to the people versus taking technically away power from the Leo energy. So again, people in the spotlight, celebrities, kings, leaders, so to speak. And we also see that currently with soon to be the North Node moving into Aquarius, which is about our guiding light and what we're stepping into, versus the South Node, which will be moving into Leo as well. So we're shedding and releasing this Leo energy. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. It's so fascinating. And it reminds me of something I heard AOC say on a podcast recently, where she was essentially saying you can't earn $1 billion. You have to not be paying people what they're worth. You have to be like breaking law somehow, because it's not a sustainable practice in the marketplace to earn, quote, $1 billion. And so I love hearing that the power is going to return to the people, because Case and I are always saying we are for the people. Like, this podcast is for the people, power to the people. But it's also interesting because you were talking about other countries and revolutions that have happened there in opposition to either like colonial powers or internal imbalances and struggles. And I'm curious to hear your take on the notion of the US being a superpower in the global space, and what you think some of the aspects are in the US's chart that may suggest that this type of positioning is sustainable for the US, or are we also going to see that shift when you talk about the power going more to the people? Is that also going to impact the US's stance in the global space as a superpower?
Great question. I think absolutely. My very honest personal answer is that the United States is going to be going through this major death and rebirth moment. Biggest correlation here would be currency and the economy. And back to your question, when it comes to the economy in general, are we going to prevail or have stress? I think we're going into a period of economic stress. And I think that partially is so much of the transformation for the United States. Obviously, the US being one of the most powerful, quote, countries when it comes to economics specifically. And of course, the dollar being tied to oil throughout history here until right now, right? And all of these are reflecting the transits that not only are happening, but are coming up as well. So it's interesting because I think the biggest change is going to be power being distributed to the people, specifically through economic means, meaning that what we're seeing with taxes and what we're seeing with billionaires. I love the quote of, yeah, people don't become billionaires by earning, right? And that's so true. And so I think that this will be the pinnacle of the quote unquote downfall itself. But I don't want to fear monger with that information. I think that ultimately where we're going as a result of this is a more equal, well dispersed, let's say, future. And that's really what I believe. It's also interesting because Pluto in Aquarius actually talks about monopolizing things. And so specifically Aquarius, it's about technology. So for example, way back, we're talking about technology then, which was paper or papyrus, right? How to use that technology to write or do this or that. And now we're seeing that one good example is TikTok. Who owns TikTok? And what does that mean economically for the country and in terms of Pluto and Aquarius, control of the people, surveillance of the people? So there's a lot that goes into it. But I think in general, we're going to see more coming up around monopolies on AI and technology and all of these other things that will be part of this downfall or the revolution too, in terms of what are we revolting against? That would be part of the picture.
Yeah, it is such fascinating stuff. And I will say, we have discussed to at length this AI bubble and what that could possibly mean. Is it going to burst? What's going on with that? And I also think concurrently, when you think about platforms such as TikTok, that is also a platform that has in ways democratized the voice, right? Because anybody can go on, make an account, and have their voice be heard. But it's who's controlling it at the top to shadow certain things or color the algorithm in certain ways too. So I do feel like there's this blend of everything where it's like, ultimately, this is not sustainable. Something's got to give. But aside from that, one major thing for the US is the midterms coming up this November. Curious, Megan, if you have any special astro insight prediction wise for the US.
Yeah, this has already been on my mind. Right around that point in October and through November, we actually will have two retrogrades happening and playing out. One being a Mercury retrograde through Scorpio, which in general, again, Scorpio is actually ruled by Pluto. So it carries that similar tone of what is the deeper truth? What is corrupt? What is being even tampered with? Like that, to be honest, that stresses me out just a little bit. I don't love that transit to be happening right as we're seeing midterms come along. And then at the same time, we have a Venus retrograde also happening in Scorpio, but moving back over that threshold and moving back into Libra. And so Libra is a very different energy. Libra is all about equality and balance and justice, right? And so we're toying with these two sides of what is happening in Scorpio. Again, very deep, dark, sometimes corrupt. There's power struggles versus what's happening in Libra, which is saying, hey, we want things to be equal and fair. To be honest, I don't love it. I don't think that this is a good indicator in terms of what we should ideally expect. I think for those of us who are wanting to see equality come about. However, it feels like a fight for that. It feels like we're fighting for power yet again. It's a good way to put it.
When you talk about the fighting for power, sorry, this just brings me back to the AI conversation. And I just have to ask one thing that I saw recently, I think it was a college graduation. The speaker was praising AI and saying, this is this new kind of technology that is going to be our path into the future. And the students in the audience started booing her. And she got a very kind of visceral reaction from those in the crowd. And so with AI, I'm curious, is it inevitable or do the people have the power to push back and stop it from the harms it may cause?
Great question. I personally think that it is inevitable. Right now, outside of Pluto and Aquarius, which really brings that AI, not only AI, like technology in general, this is a very literal transit when it comes to technological advancements overall. However, outside of that transit, we also newly have Uranus and Gemini. And Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. So again, bringing in that very future oriented updates to the system type of energy. And then Gemini specifically is about how we connect, how we communicate, how we think, how we speak. So you're technically updating all of that, right? How are we writing our papers? Is it us? Is it AI? How are we connecting? Is it writing a letter or is it through social media and all of these other means? And so you're seeing both of these things happen at once. And picture this, you have Uranus and then you have, so in Gemini, and then you have Pluto in Aquarius. And as Uranus inches its way forward, these two will actually form what's called a trine, which again is that aspect that's very supportive, very expansive, and growth oriented. And these two planets, being outer planets, are all about forward motion, change, and transformation. And so when we see this trine happen, which we are about to really step into that now, we will see AI and technology in general and the ways that we connect exponentially grow. I think even a year from now, we're going to be like, wow. And this is going to affect the ways we communicate, the ways that we learn, the ways that we connect overall, but also things like transportation and how we move around and what we think of in terms of the future and what it looks like overall. I think it's going to change rapidly. So I think it is inevitable. However, Pluto again is about control. And so there's some type of energy here where the tricky part is parameters. What are the rules or the laws or the regulations with AI and how far can it go? Because Pluto can really exacerbate things in a not so great way when it's unregulated, so to speak.
Totally. Part of me is how can we embrace the positive aspects of AI and how it can be beneficial? But I also think that when we talk about the big revolution energy, we do have to tear down everything to figure out how to rebuild. And part of that process, I think, is going to be a little bit ugly and a little bit challenging because when you talk about death and rebirth, something's going down for something to come up. So the scales of balance is definitely a question. But talking about the scales of balance, let's talk about President Trump, because I know that you always have a lot to say about him. And that's been so fascinating for me too, individually, Trump's chart and certain things that are in his birth chart, but also transits that happen to him that have been really telling of his story in terms of how he came to power and leadership and the ways in which he runs the country.
Yeah, it's interesting because my entire, let's say, career in politics actually stems from me one day making a TikTok. A client asked me to look at his chart and I did. And I was like, oh gosh, look, not to be dramatic, but that he could die or there's something death oriented here. And that was July 11th, 2024. So 2 days after that, the assassination attempt had happened. And that was what put me on the map, which is so funny. And that's how I fell into political astrology. Yeah, Trump's chart is really interesting. I think the biggest thing, again, when we're dealing with power, and again, power is not bad necessarily. It has two expressions, but for him, I feel like there is that slightly negative tone to what's happening under the scenes and how much power is enough type of thing. So when we think about power, we think to Pluto. And Trump specifically has Pluto in the first house, Leo. And so immediately, that's how you put a chart together where you sense the energy and you're like, ooh, there must be a really prominent Pluto aspect or presence in his chart. So the first house is all about the self. It's all about your identity, your appearance, and kind of like the mask that you wear in your life. And so Pluto in the first house talks about an overly powerful person. And sometimes it can go to extremes. Sometimes it's used for good, and sometimes it's used for corruption or hiding the hidden truth of things. So I think that's one of his most notable placements in his chart. And it's interesting too, if you can imagine, Pluto is actually sextile Neptune for him in the third house. Now, the third house is Gemini coded for everybody. It talks about how we think, how we speak, what we speak about. And so it's interesting because Pluto, which can be a bit manipulative sometimes, sextile Neptune. Neptune is this very idealistic placement. And it's usually one of two things. It's, oh, rose-colored glasses, I'm not seeing the full reality, but it feels really good. Or the other side of it being like, oh, there's deception and I have a lack of clarity in some way. And I thought that was really interesting because when I think of Trump's energy in general and his career and his political career, so much of it is about what he's saying and the ways that he actually can influence and manipulate, in my opinion, and almost come off as, oh, I have this power. However, there's always this cloudy, deceptive energy around it, which is very Neptune coded. So very literal. I'm like, wow. And then one other thing I want to mention is that he actually has Mars, which Mars is the planet of impulse. And technically it rules over war and combat. And it has no inhibition, let's say. And he has Mars in Leo, which is another very fiery energy, right? And then it's conjoining his ascendant. So this, in theory, would be someone who's very impulsive. You're like, hey, can you chill out a little bit? Can you not tweet the thing? Can you not say the thing on live TV? That's the energy I get with Mars conjunct the ascendant. And it's very fiery and it's very combative.
Wow. We obviously have covered Trump a lot on this podcast, and he actually does have this kind of charismatic influentialness to him, and in the way that he moves in politics and is able to really push his will on to other policymakers and other people in politics to get the outcome that he wants. And if only he used that power for good, we would be so much better off. And then when it comes to the communications piece of it, we always say when we're dissecting his State of the Union or other messaging that he does, he really does his best when he's not following a script. That's a little bit too rigid for him. And in terms of his delivery and his comfortability with the message, it's always when he's going off script. So again, so aligned with what in his charts.
Yeah, and I think that's the higher expression of Mars, conjunct the ascendant, and these other aspects to his third house. Mars is very instinctual. So this is someone where I'm like, oh, yeah, you kind of want to speak instinctually or act instinctually. And ideally, we have free will, so it doesn't have to be a negative aspect. And that's probably really important too for anybody listening. If you have Mars conjunct the ascendant, that's not a bad placement, but it does mean that you have to be more intentional about how you use Mars, right? So sometimes it's like anger, heat, impulsivity. Other times it's, oh, I act on my instincts and I'm very passionate, but not in a malicious way. So that is a good distinction. And I think one other thing I want to mention about his chart is that he actually has the sun in Gemini and then Uranus in Gemini as well. And so when it comes to predictive astrology and you're looking at everybody who's involved in the time frame that we are currently finding ourselves in and moving into, because we really are at the start of this energy. So everything we've seen play out between 2025 and 2026, this is really the start of a newer timeline. But the key players will have similar indicators in their chart. So again, Uranus in Gemini, which is very strongly correlated with major involvements of war for the United States. We start to look at people in the game and say, who has that placement natally or something else with that signature? But Trump himself literally has Uranus and the sun in Gemini conjoining his North Node. So much of his destiny was to essentially play a role in what we're seeing now. And I just find that really interesting.
That's so crazy because of that Mars tension. He's cool with war. There's part of him that likes it. There's a part of him that feels like this is a power grab that he can handle and take. And he has that confidence to just go ahead and go right in. He just has no qualms about good, bad, ugly, striking and just doing whatever he needs to do. And that's the part of him that is the volatility that has helped create this environment.
Yeah, and arguably that's the Leo energy backing that Mars placement, because Leo really, it is bold, it is confident, and it doesn't mind being in the limelight. Again, arguably Mars conjunct the ascendant is somebody who's very impulsive, almost for the sake of being the center of attention or having the spotlight on them in Leo. And again, that's not a bad energy. And sometimes you don't even try for that to happen, yet it can still happen with that type of placement. But all of that being in Leo in the first house is very much so, oh, I'm bold. So yeah, very literal.
Wow, certainly bold. When we read Kamala Harris's book, she talked about her interactions with Trump. And one of the things that she said is that she feels like she sees two sides to him, right? When he would pick up the phone and call her, she would get one side, but obviously to the public and other appearances, there's certainly another side she saw to him. So can you go back and walk through that part of his chart?
Yeah, that is his Gemini energy.
Okay.
Geminis get a bad rap for being quote unquote two-faced. And the reason being is Gemini is technically the archetype of the twins. And so it's very symbolic of literally having two parts of yourself. And I don't view that as a negative thing, but every type of sign has the lower expression, the higher expression, and of course, free will and how you choose to use that energy. At its lowest, it can come off. It's very double-sided, like a double-sided coin. And you have to be careful with that. But that would be his Gemini sun.
Okay.
And even again, Gemini sun, the North Node, and Uranus all sitting pretty tightly together. And so Uranus is also very disruptive. It's all about shaking things up and destabilizing things. So arguably with the sun being his chart ruler, so he's Leo rising, his chart ruler would be the sun. And that means it's personal to him as well. It's this very chaotic, disruptive energy. But in Gemini, it carries that tone of two-faced, technically, or can. One other thing I want to mention, he was born on an eclipse in Sagittarius, which is a very important thing to consider. So number one, he was born on a full moon, but it was a total lunar eclipse. And so what that means is that eclipses moving forward actually impact him more than just the average Joe. Another fun fact is that the entire royal family has ties to eclipses, even people who are married into the royal family. And so way back in ancient astrology, an eclipse was a bad omen. Sometimes it talked about the death of a king, especially in civilizations who literally have kings ruling them. So again, the royal family, we see that very often. So I find that really fascinating with Trump and his legacy overall and how that will age. That's another thing to consider right now. We're dealing with back-to-back eclipses in his 8th house. Pisces, which is about change, transformation, and trust and secrecy, and even loss can come up there too. So there's a lot going on with him right now.
A lot going on at the moment.
Yeah.
Megan, thank you so much. I do just want to share again with our listeners that, like Megan mentioned, we all have free will to take the astrology and take the moment and manifest your own destiny, as they say. So I think a lot will be discovered and uncovered as we continue to go down this trajectory. But we are so appreciative of your insights and all of your wisdom. And thank you so much for sharing. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I know everyone's going to love it. Megan, can you tell our listeners where they can find you for more information and all of that?
Yes, I am most active on TikTok, and my handle is at Meggly, Meggly. I have all of my links listed there to book a reading. Most of the time, I just do one-on-one personal readings. But yeah, and that's about it for now. It's just reading my little heart out. Yeah.
Love that. Again, thank you so much for joining us on such a fascinating conversation. I can't wait until we see all these things play out and then we get to roll these clips back and be like, and Megan said it first. You heard it here first. So thank you so much.
Yes. Oh, you're so welcome. And yeah, I think that we have a very fun timeline to still unfold. And I think a lot of people too, just again, for listeners' sake, I think they're probably like, okay, we're in it, but when does it fully wrap up? And I just want to say, I think right now we're in about a 7-year remaining timeline. And so when you're looking at the astrology, and like you said, Casey, it can feel very daunting and almost inescapable at certain moments, just remembering that you do have free will. And so you want to look at the energies at hand where, yes, Pluto can talk about a power struggle. However, it's power to you as well. And so rather than being in fear, which is a lower expression of Pluto, it's really like, how can you step into your power as part of a bigger collective at hand?
I love that. And we're all going to step into our power. Yes.
Me too.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.